Our chalice lighting this morning is Until All Means All by Erica A. Hewitt. And I forgot to take off my mask. The chalice, a symbol of Unitarian Universalism, arose as a beacon of hope in an atmosphere of tyranny. The chalice arose as a sign of promise that the marginalized would neither be forgotten nor ignored, because they are beloved and precious from the perspective of the holy. This morning we remember all of the people who have been told explicitly or implicitly through police violence or government policy, through derision or dehumanization, that they are anything less than whole, anything less than beloved. As we each light a chalice in our homes, may we make of our lives a beacon, a symbol of our promise to draw the circle wide, a sign that we will not rest until all means all.
Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln on this Sunday morning. I'm the Reverend Oscar Sinclair. I'm joined in the chancel this morning by our worship associate, Mary Kay Stillwell. Over the last couple years now, we're closing in on 2 years, our way of gathering together keeps changing. But whether in person, on Zoom, a YouTube live stream, or some other way of being together that we cannot yet imagine, each time that we gather in worship is a chance to deepen our connection with the source of meaning in our lives, to proclaim who we are and what we are about, to throw open the doors of this congregation both physically and metaphorically, and proclaim the radical love and hospitality that is at the heart of this faith. Every week, we say that the Unitarian Church of Lincoln aspires to be a loving community, uniting reason with spiritual exploration to transform ourselves and our world. And every week, our job is to figure out what that means, to draw the circle just a little bit wider every time we gather. A few notes this morning. There is good news on COVID right now in Lincoln. Since the peak of the Omicron surge just 2 weeks ago, cases are down over 80%. Hospitalizations are about a third of what they were at the peak. Because of this, the health department here in town lifted the direct health measure, the mask mandate, a week early on Friday. That is unambiguously a good thing. And it is going to have some effects, probably, on how we do things here at church. There are more folks here in the sanctuary this morning than there have been in a month, which is good. On a personal note, this means that it may be the case that I tell a pun in the sermon later and hear something other than strained laughter from the hostages at the piano and the AV cart. Or maybe not. Maybe that will actually still be what happens. But we'll change other things as well. We're going to keep asking you to wear masks in the building for now, because we as a community have both a wide range of health conditions in our building and risk tolerances. And we're going to keep live streaming our services. We'll probably keep doing that regardless of COVID. And none of this is to say that COVID-19 is over, right? We had guest musicians lined up this week, and they had to take a rain check, as I understand it, because they are in quarantine for a COVID exposure. So this morning we'll see some recorded music from around the denomination in places where we would have had a guest musician. And we're going to keep having moments like that for the foreseeable future. But within that somewhat complicated and still fluid context, we'll likely start to have more events here at the congregation at 6300 A Street. And we'll be starting some conversations about what the next steps seem like. It is supposed to be 60 degrees outside today. It is unseasonably warm for February in Nebraska. But it also feels like perhaps we're in a thaw from the metaphorical cold, dark winter that we have been in. So for this morning, whether you are joining us in person, on live stream, or watching this recorded on a Tuesday night, welcome. It is good to be together. This is where we would have our first piece of guest music. So it will be the first piece of music on the slideshow. I don't know what these are yet. We just put these in yesterday.
I'm grateful for the sun that shines. I'm grateful for the rain. And when life's bumps and life's bruises come, I'm grateful all the same. So just knowing I am a lonely soul, hand in hand with a world full of lonely souls, brings peace and love to my beating heart, and faith blooms in me again. I'm grateful for music that I may hear. I'm grateful for a tune. The songs that seem to flow through my mind like a river chasing the moon. So just knowing I am a lonely soul, hand in hand with a world full of lonely souls, brings peace and love to my beating heart, and faith blooms in me again. I'm grateful for a smiling face. I'm grateful to see you today. I'm grateful for nature around us all, and for feeling each joy and each pain. Somehow knowing we are all lonely souls, hand in hand with every lonely soul, brings peace and love to each beating heart, and faith blooms in us again. And what is this faith that I'm speaking of? It isn't in some old bearded man up above. It's music and poetry, beauty and love in all of us everywhere. It's music and poetry, beauty and love in all of us everywhere.
Our story today is called Just Ask. Be different, be brave, be you, by Sonia Sotomayor. Hi, I'm Sonia. My friends and I are planting a garden. Gardens are magical places. Thousands of plants bloom together, but every flower, every berry, and every leaf is different. Each has a different smell, different color, different shape, and different purpose. Some flowers need lots of sunlight. Others thrive in the shade. Some have to be trimmed regularly, while others are better off left alone. Some trees and flowers are more fragile, and others are more hardy. Kids are all different too. Some of us are in a hurry, and others take more time. Some of us seem shy and quiet, while others are chatty and loud. Some of our differences are easy to notice. Each of us grows in our own way. So if you're curious about other kids, just ask. Each one of us is important. Each one of us has worth and dignity, and we all deserve to be treated fairly and kindly. Not everyone is comfortable answering questions about themselves, but I don't mind. What am I doing? Well, several times a day I prick my finger to measure the sugar in my blood, and I give myself shots of medicine called insulin. I do this because I have diabetes and my body doesn't make insulin naturally like other people's. Even though needles make some people uncomfortable, I need insulin shots to stay healthy. Do you ever need to take medicine to be healthy? I do. My name is Raphael, and I have asthma, which means I sometimes have trouble breathing. When that happens, I take a break and use an inhaler with medicine to make breathing easier. Quiet time helps me slow down and catch my breath. My inhaler is like a tool to help my body. Do you use a tool to help your body? I'm Anthony, and I use a wheelchair to get around. Even though I can't run with my legs, I can go super fast. How do you get from place to place? My name is Madison, and my guide dog Lucky helps me get to places safely because I'm blind. My friend Arturo is blind too. He uses a cane to get around. And even though we can't see, we strengthen our other senses and notice lots of details others may miss. We can hear with our ears, smell with our noses, and feel with our hands. How do you use your senses? I'm great at dinosaurs. I know all about them. I'm Jordan, and I have autism. Organizing and counting all my dinosaur toys again and again makes me feel calm. My classmate Tiana also has autism, but it's different for her. She doesn't talk. But I really like to talk. I especially like to talk about dinosaurs. What do you like to talk about? My name is Manuel, and I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's also called ADHD. I can get frustrated when I really feel the need to move around, though I'm supposed to sit still. When my teachers and friends are patient with me, I appreciate it if I forget something or I get distracted. And then I can get back on track. What's helpful to you? I'm Nolan. It's helpful to me when the food I eat has a clear label that says it's nut-free because I'm allergic to nuts. They can make me so sick that I would have to go to the hospital if I ate any, even by accident. So I always tell people about my allergy and ask if any food has nut ingredients. Speaking up helps to keep me healthy. How do you use your voice? I love to sing, and I love to talk. I love to make new friends and be included. I'm Grace. I was born with Down syndrome. Kids like me with Down syndrome have an extra building block called a chromosome in our bodies, but we're all different from each other too. I can do almost anything any other kid can do, though learning new things can sometimes take time. One way I learn is to ask questions. What helps you learn? Hi, it's me, Sonia, again. I ask questions too. When something seems different or new, I just ask my parents or my teachers, and they help me to understand, especially if my friends don't feel ready to explain. And this is what I've learned. Imagine if all the plants in this garden were exactly the same. Like, what if we could only grow peas? That would mean no strawberries or cucumbers or carrots. It might also be mean to trees or roses or sunflowers. We all deserve equal opportunities. We all deserve kindness and to be treated fairly. Just like in our garden, all the ways we are different to make our neighborhood, our whole world really, make everything more interesting and fun. And just like all of these plants, each of us has unique powers to share with the world and make it more interesting and richer. What will you do with your powers? That is the end of our story.
Our next hymn is number 126, lyrics either above me or in books in front of you or hearing Julie sing. This is Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Will you please rise in body or in spirit? I can say that now. Okay.
A central part of our service is the time when we join together as a community to mark the moments of our lives. We share with one another our joys, our sorrows, the events that mark the steps on our journey. The threads of sorrow and those of joy are intertwined in the fabric of our lives, present for all, remembered by all. We share those threads, and then they are woven together with those of others in our community. Our joys are shared and magnified, and we are comforted in our sorrows. As the next hymn plays, I invite you to type into the chat your name or the name of another you wish to be remembered, either in joy or in sorrow.
So let's play our next hymn. And If you are here in the room, if you have names of people that you are carrying in joy or in sorrow, speak them into this silence here in a moment.
Our hymn,
Sorry.
our hymn is 352, Find a Stillness.
Find a stillness, hold a stillness, let the stillness carry me. Find the silence, hold the silence, let the silence carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony. Seek the essence, hold the essence, let the essence carry me. Let me flower, help me flower, watch me flower, carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony.
We have several sorrows. Denise Du Bois's sister, Danelle Hill, died yesterday of lymphoma. And from our chat, Denise Dickinson's asked for love and concern for my sister, Deidre. Mary Sotomayor, sadness for the family of Paul Twork, who died Friday. From Jamie Radcliffe, Dom. Pam Wakeman, concern for the Ukraine. Are there any other sorrows or joys? Evelyn Weymouth gives us a joy, Oscar's joy at having people in the sanctuary. Hostages at the piano and the AV. Chelsea for her wonderful stories, and Julie for singing the hymns. All joy. Now in the sanctuary of shared silence, let us make room for all, both spoken and unspoken. Thank you for your presence.
Each week we take up a collection to support the work of this church and our partners in the world. We do this because we each contribute to this congregation in many different ways, and we each are strengthened by our participation in this congregation in many different ways. And one of the ways that we mark that is through this offering that we do every week. So as this next song plays, I invite you to text UC Lincoln and the amount you wish to give to 73256. I'll say that we have passed the plate in the past. We will do it again. This is one of the things that is coming back as we start to open up more as the numbers in Lincoln drop. But for now, I invite you to text UC Lincoln and the amount to 73256.
We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the birds, they tell us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us. We're here to be lifted in love, to listen to love as a flower raises its face to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the sky, it tells us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us. We're here to be lifted in love, to listen to love as the children raise all their faces to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the seas, they tell us. We're here to be lifted in love, to listen to love as the flower raises its face to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love.
Our reading today is the parable of the widow and the unjust judge from Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. Whoops. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, "In a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, 'Grant me justice against my opponent.' For a while he refused. But later he said to himself, 'Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continuing coming.' And the Lord said, 'Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?'"
A parable about the need for us to pray always and not to lose heart. About 2 weeks ago, I was publicly called an angel of Satan. Specifically, and I looked this up because it lives on YouTube, we have pastors that speak the word, but they don't speak the word. Satan has ministers who disguise themselves. Satan disguises himself as an angel of light and has ministers who do the same. Now, That is a thing I am quite sure that people think about me regularly. But I have rarely had it repeated twice in the space of an hour, first to my face in a break at a city council meeting, then in public testimony in front of the Lincoln City Council. The staff here suggested afterwards that I consider putting together new business cards. To me, it brings to mind a story about John Murray, who was one of the founding generation of Universalists in America. And the story goes that one time when he was preaching Universalism in Philadelphia, some more orthodox friends will say, threw a brick through the window that landed in the chancel next to him. And he bent down and picked it up, and he showed it to the congregation, and he said, "This argument is weighty and well delivered, but I find it unconvincing." The city council meeting, in which I was also apparently perverting the youth of Lincoln, another business card perhaps, was a public hearing to consider revisions to Article 11 of Lincoln's Municipal Code. Specifically, these revisions would broaden civil rights protections here in the city, including gender identity, sexual orientation, veteran status, clarifying language around disability and race. These are common sense, good changes. They are not ones that I would have thought controversial. They reflect the community I want to help build here in Lincoln. And they provide a mechanism for addressing discrimination in the city. The mechanism already exists. They just expand the pool of people who can access that mechanism. The measure was introduced and championed by Councilwoman Sandra Washington, who I have known as long as I have been in Lincoln as a wise and compassionate leader. I suspect some of you may know her as the same. For those on the live stream, there are broad nods here in the room. And these are changes that have a long history here in Lincoln. 10 years ago, the City Council introduced and passed what was then called the Fairness Ordinance, which would have done much the same work. A number of groups in Lincoln opposed the Fairness Ordinance and collected enough signatures to trigger a referendum. In a story that is somewhat tangential to the sermon this morning, the City Council at that time decided to shelve the Fairness Ordinance rather than bring it to a public vote. 10 years later, it came back before the City Council. And when I spoke in favor of the ordinance 2 weeks ago, I said this: as transplanted Lincolnites, my wife and I have fallen in love with this city. We regularly tell our friends and family across the country about this place that we have landed in. We encourage them to come out and move here and be a part of the community. And in many of those conversations, one of the first questions our friends ask is, will I be safe there? Will I be protected legally from discrimination based on who I am or who I love? So this ordinance goes a long way to making the answer to that question yes. Because right now, we know that the answer is not always yes, particularly in public accommodation. I cannot tell you how many conversations I had, I told the City Council, in my office at the church with folks from this city who have been profoundly hurt, personally, professionally, and economically, by discrimination on the basis of their race, sexual orientation, or gender identity here in Lincoln in the last 5 years. And every time I have one of those meetings, I'm sad. And every time I have one of those meetings, I'm angry, because that does not reflect the community that I wish to be a part of building. This apparently is what being an angel of Satan sounds like. I joke about that because while much of the opposition to this measure is framed in the language of religion, it is a religion that is based in fear, anger, mistrust of the other, values that are antithetical to my understanding of what faith is. Faith grounded in love, in courage, in good humor. Good humor. P.J. O'Rourke of blessed memory wrote, "The one attribute that we absolutely share with our Creator, we have a sense of humor." Right off the bat, there's Genesis 1:27. God created man in his own image. And then I look in the mirror. And this very personal dismissal on religious grounds is ironic for me as well, because the day I was at that council hearing, I had just 48 hours earlier come back from spending a week in Florida at a conference of clergy from around the country, diving deep into Christian scripture through the lens of justice. Dr. Warren Carter, who's a professor of New Testament at Phillips Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma, hotbed of progressivism, led us through 3 days of conversation grounded in the Gospel of Luke. One of the passages that we spent most of a day on was this piece from Luke 18, this parable of the unjust judge and the persistent widow. Mary Kay read it earlier, but for the sake of repetition. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, "In a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. And in that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, 'Grant me justice against my opponent.' For a while the judge refused, but later he said to himself, 'Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming.'" And Jesus says, listen to what the unjust judge says. Like all parables, this is a story that is designed to tell us something about God and something about our own humanity. There are two characters here, a widow and a judge. The widow is an archetype in Christian scripture. In the ancient Near East, widows faced enormous systematic disadvantages, what we would now call oppression. They usually did not inherit land. They had little recourse when wronged. Widows show up throughout the ministry of Jesus in all four Gospels, both on their own terms and as representatives of folks whom society forgets. It's possible as well that Jesus' regular use of widows as a rhetorical device, as a group of people in need of care, was not just rhetoric. Consider this. Every single Christmas, we tell the nativity story, right? Even in a Unitarian church, we could probably tell this story by heart. An angel appears to Mary and says, "You are having a child." An angel appears to Joseph and says, "Mary is having a child. It's not yours. Don't worry about it." Mary giving birth to the baby Jesus in a stable, Joseph keeping watch and trusting that message from God. But while Mary continues as a character in the story all the way through to the end, Joseph actually disappears after the nativity chapters. He never comes back as a character in the story. And so there is at least one tradition in Christianity that holds that this is because Joseph died in Jesus' childhood, making those stories of widows pleading their case more than just a metaphor to the historical Jesus. So if the widow represents the powerless in society in this parable, the judge represents traditional understandings of power. In the context of the world of the story, judges held weighty roles, respected in the community and ordained by the community and by God to their work. The book of Deuteronomy records the traditional charge that Moses was said to have given the judges of Israel. Give the members of your community a fair hearing and judge rightly between one person and another, whether citizen or resident alien. You must not be partial in judging. Hear out the small and the great alike. You shall not be intimidated by anyone, for the judgment is God's. So even in this case, where the judge neither feared God nor had respect for people, the parable sets up a very clear power dynamic between the widow and the judge, the powerful and the powerless, respected and oppressed. But all throughout Luke's gospel, the author is interested in breaking down those expectations. A few months ago in December, we read the opening chapter of Luke, Mary's song that opens the book. My soul magnifies the Lord. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he sent away empty. That is the context that the author of Luke is writing. And in this story, 18 chapters later, we see that happen. Because there's a quirk in first century jurisprudence. The power dynamics of the story are not what they appear to be at first, because judgment happens in public. Judges, in the world Jesus was preaching in, heard petitions and delivered their decisions in the center of town, in full view of the gathered community. So even though the judge in this story has no reason to grant the widow's request, he has power, she does not. He does not fear God or have respect for people. He changes his mind after she persists. Because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continuously coming. The Greek is actually a little bit more colorful. The literal translation is closer to, so that she may not come and slap me under the eye. Which is a euphemism in Koine Greek that means more or less the same as our English, give me a black eye in public. Even a judge that does not fear God fears public shame, as it turns out, and tires of somebody continually highlighting his hypocrisy and injustice. So who has the power in this story? The judge, who has all the formal power? Or the widow, the petitioner whose cause is just and who persists publicly? One can imagine the judge in the town square saying, I am not interested in hearing this case, nevertheless, she has persisted. For some reason, the judge has a Kentucky accent in my head. A parable about the need to pray always and not to lose heart. The widow's cause is just, but in the story, it is not the innate justice of her cause that wins the day. It is her persistence. It is the judge and the people's recognition that the status quo cannot continue, that the injustice that has been done to the widow isn't just going to go away, no matter how much they would like to pretend it's not there. It's not hard to see why this is a parable for all those looking for justice. It's not hard to imagine why a clergy conference concerned with justice might pick this particular story to talk about for a day. Because it is easy to lose heart. It is easy to lose the grounding of our faith, what Jesus calls praying always, but what we Unitarian Universalists might call being in touch with the Spirit, being in touch with whatever source of meaning is in our lives. But persistence is a movement strategy, whether in the first century or the 21st, trying to expand civil rights protections in a city. Persistence works. Now, there are parts of this story that don't actually fit particularly well with the anecdote I began with. In the public hearing that I talked about, it was the public, not the officials, who had no respect for people. But a decade after the city council had to shelve the first version of the fairness ordinance on Monday afternoon, this week, it passed the new protections unanimously. And on Tuesday, well, on Monday, it was a powerful moment and one that came after long persistence. And then I rhetorically jumped right over that because on Tuesday, the local paper reported that the Nebraska Family Alliance has started to collect signatures to trigger a referendum. But here's the thing, that's not a cause for despair. Not yet. Because we know that justice can take a while, and we know that it doesn't just come, it doesn't happen by itself. It happens because the folks that want it to persist. They keep at it. They pray always, and they do not lose heart. So we know a few things for the coming weeks. First, that we are not going to cede the language of faith to the Nebraska Family Alliance. We're just not going to do that. This week, a letter ran in the Journal Star signed by 40 Lincoln clergy, including the bishops of the Episcopal Diocese of Nebraska, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America in Nebraska, the district superintendent of the Methodist Church. I think every Presbyterian minister in town, every Episcopal minister in town, every Unitarian minister in town, all one of us. 40 in total. Putting the Christian great commandment to love your neighbor right next to the Unitarian Universalist principles and the call from Pope Francis to universal fraternity. And then saying, we thank our city council for their vote. We support this change because of our faith, not in spite of it. And we are going to keep saying that. And we know that we're right. It's kind of that straightforward. We know that this cause is right. We know that it was right 10 years ago. I think we've brought some of the rest of Lincoln along as well in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, the last time this fight happened in Lincoln, I was in Baltimore in 2012, in the bluest dot of the bluest state in the country, and we were fighting a referendum to get marriage equality passed in the 2012 election. Things have changed in the last decade. The world has changed in 10 years, and it has changed because so many of you have persisted. So we will have more to do on this in the coming weeks and months. We'll find out more about what that looks like once the time to collect signatures has passed. If there are enough signatures for a referendum, then, well, I think we'll have a referendum this time. But at this church, our theme for the month of February, is widening the circle, and that's what we are going to do. Yesterday, I attended remotely the memorial service for my friend Jean Pupke. Now, I happen to know that her congregation does not use the Soul Matters themes. She was not a big fan of them, but she and I disagreed about that. And I happen to know that way back at the beginning of the pandemic, she, along with many of us, planned her own memorial service. But the song that she chose to send us all out from that moment was Draw the Circle Wide by Mark Miller. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song, no one stands alone. Draw the circle wide. Movements take time. They take a lot of persistence. They take drawing the circle wider and wider and wider, and working to do that every week. So we've got our marching orders. Now, it's time to pray always and not lose heart. Our closing hymn is number 157, Step by Step, the Longest March.
Rise in body and or spirit.
Step by step, the longest march can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly numb, and by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none. Step by step, the longest march can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, and by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none.
No single service is the beginning or ending of a story. That is the implicit message every single time we gather. Because we are part of a story, we are part of an effort that goes back years, goes back generations, and that will continue for years and generations as we continue to draw the circle wide. So we do that over years and we do that over weeks. Go forth and do. Go in peace, go in kindness, and go in faith. Amen. There is a postlude, I believe.
1, 2, 3, go!
We see that we're all to be right. We know that we are strong and united. We exercise our right to assemble. That's when the proud and mighty start to tremble. Nothing takes one drink. Nothing takes one drink. Nothing takes one drink. Hey, hey, look this way. This is what
right, that closes this service. I will say, next week we have a guest speaker coming. It's a friend of mine named Reverend Kathleen Riegelman. She is a chaplain at K-State Medical Center down in Kansas City. So she'll be reflecting